Today I'm going to show you how to make realistic looking steam right inside of Photoshop. Hi, I'm Brian Rodgers Jr. If you'd like to learn more about me and some of my work, head over to digitalartthatrocks.com. So recently I was shooting a commercial assignment and I had this coffee mug in the background of the shot. It wasn't by any means the focal point, but by the time I actually got around to shooting it, the coffee was cold. So I had two different options. I could either brew another cup of coffee to get realistic steam, or I could do it in post-production. For this particular image, I decided that it would make more sense for me to actually do it in post. So when I brought it into Photoshop, I had to actually come up with a way to create steam. And I could have very well went to a stock website and found some steam and used blending modes and composite it that way, but I wanted to find a way to do it purely in Photoshop. So I tried a few different things. I used some brushes and messed around with the custom settings and everything, and I got some pretty realistic looking stuff, but I actually found an even better way to do it, and it's actually utilizing one of Photoshop's new features. So let's take a look. Okay, so we're here in Photoshop, and this is an image that I shot a while back. It was basically a test shoot, and ultimately it didn't make it into my portfolio, but it's still kind of a cool shot. But anyway, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and create some steam, and we're gonna kind of do it in a unconventional way, I guess you would say. We're gonna utilize one of Photoshop's newer features called the flame generator. And in order to do that, we need to actually create a path first. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and create a new layer, and we will just call this, we'll call this Steam 1. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab the pen tool just by pressing the letter P, and we wanna think about basically how steam interacts with coffee. So any image you've ever seen, typically it's gonna have some kind of curve. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to make a little curve here, and there's no set way of doing it. I mean, it's kind of an organic process, so really it's however you wanna make it. Every time you do it, it's gonna be a little different. But I think something like that looks pretty cool. So now that we got our path, I'm gonna go up here to Filter, and I'm gonna go to Render, and then click Flame. And you'll see that we've got this dialog that comes up, and there's a lot of different options. And basically what you want to do is you kind of want to play around with this. Generally, as far as the flame type, you want to keep it to one flame along path, because if you go to any of these other ones, like multiple flames, one direction, you'll see very quickly that it doesn't resemble steam in the least bit. The two that do really is candlelight. You could use that, or one flame along path. And that's typically the one that I use. As far as width goes, really you just kind of want to play around with it. Obviously the higher you go, the bigger it gets, and it looks kind of weird. So you want to keep it, somewhere in the lower numbers. I'd say under 3 digits probably. Something like that looks pretty good. So next I'm going to go to Advanced, because there's not really too many other options here for us. Now when you go to Advanced, there's a lot of different things you can play around with as well. Ultimately you gotta judge this visually. You can't really go by numbers, just because it's going to give you something different every time. But basically what you're looking for is you're looking for something that resembles steam. So just keep that in mind. I want to definitely play around with these settings a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. Opacity. You want it to be dense, but you don't want it to be overly dense. Keep in mind this is on its own layer, so you're going to have control of the opacity after the fact. Generally, I keep it around, 25 to 30 most of the time. Let's see, complexity, flame lines, this is pretty self-explanatory. Complexity is how complex do you want this. Again, it just comes down to your preference. Once you find something you like, then I'd kind of stick with it. Bottom alignment, that's not going to look good. You probably want to go with somewhat of a lower number. Again, flame style, there's a few different ways. There's normal, there's violent, which sounds pretty awesome. And then you got flat, and that's definitely not going to look good. So typically I stick with normal on this one. As far as the shape goes, you can vary this just a little bit, and this is all dependent upon the path that you made. So they're really subtle differences, and really it's up to you what you want to use on this. I don't really think it matters that much, but I'm pretty happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to generate a flame, and obviously this doesn't look good at all. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to get rid of this path. So I'm just going to go to the paths panel, and I'm going to click off of that work path. Going to go back to my layers, and with this layer selected, I'm actually going to desaturate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit Shift Command U to desaturate that. You can already see that it's looking like steam a little bit more than it was before. But what we need to do next is we need to change the blending mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to screen. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us something that kind of blends a little bit better, and it looks a little bit more like steam. Now the edges are pretty hard, so we're going to want to soften that up. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and convert this to a smart object. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow some flexibility. So not only can we add a layer mask, which will give us more flexibility as well to kind of blend this in, but we also have smart filters that we can now use. And I'm going to go ahead and click Gaussian blur or Gaussian blur. Everyone's got a different way of saying it. Tomato, tomato. So, and what you're going to do is you're going to kind of play around with these settings until you find something that looks pretty good. Obviously, if it's all the way down, that's just a little bit too harsh in some areas, primarily the bottom. So I'm gonna just raise this up just a little bit. That's maybe a little bit too much. It looks a little too airbrushed there. So maybe, I don't know, something like 4.3. The nice thing is, since we made this a smart object, you can always go back and change it. I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask to this. I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I'm going to make sure that my hardness is set to 0, and make sure that my flow is like 5%. And I'm going to go in here, painting with black on the layer mask, and kind of just blend this in just a little bit. I don't want it so harsh at the bottom. I'm just going to make a few swipes down here just to kind of darken it just a little bit, because it's not looking too realistic yet. I'm actually going to go into some of these other areas as well, just kind of blend those in. Really what's going to sell the effect here is how well it's blending. So you can see already that just with a few steps we've got some pretty realistic looking steam. The nice thing is it's very, very flexible. I think positioning is a huge factor in making this look realistic and selling this effect. So you'll want to play around with it and find a spot that looks pretty good. I actually think it looks pretty good over here on the side. I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously, it's still a little bland over here on the left-hand side. So what we can do then is we can actually create another path. And we're going to go ahead and hit P for the pen tool. And maybe we want something kind of swirling around in here. So maybe we'll just try, I don't know, let's try something like this. See what this does. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer as well. This may or may not look good. You know, it's one of those things where you have to kind of play around with it. And all of these settings are going to give you different results every single time you do it. So it's just a matter of playing around. Again, I'm going to go ahead and click off the path. I'm going to desaturate this. Shift Command U. I'm going to call this Steam 2. And I'm going to go ahead and convert it to a smart object. So we've got that flexibility. And obviously I need to blur this, but first we need to change the blend mode to soft light, or I'm sorry, screen. And we're going to go back to blur and Gaussian blur. Now this one, maybe I want a little bit more blurred. Not quite so much though. Again, this is something you want to kind of play around with. Okay, I'm just going to do a free transform, which is Command T. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm completely loving the way that it's angled right now. So I'm just kind of playing around. And really, this is kind of what it takes. I mean, you know, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's really up to you. You just want to make sure that you're selling the effect and you're making it look believable. That's the most important part. So, you know, maybe we want to tuck this down here in this corner. You know, I don't think that looks too bad. We're going to go ahead and add another layer mask. And you can do that by clicking on this, or in my case, I have a shortcut set up on my Wacom pen here. So that way I can literally just click the button and it makes the layer mask for me. It's pretty helpful. I'm gonna go back to the brush tool, and again, I'm just gonna kind of brush this out a little bit. I just kind of want this to blend. So you're just gonna kind of go in here and just make sure that it's blending a little bit better, because that's what it's all about. You could sit here and fine tune this all day long. I mean, it's completely up to you. I would probably spend a little bit more time on this if this were an image that I were, you know, working on for a client or just selling as stock or something like that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it, especially in the quick amount of time. And again, if you decide, you know, later on that you don't like it, you can always go back because you've got smart objects in place. But that will give you a pretty realistic looking steam right out of Photoshop. So you don't necessarily have to rely on stock images and make selections or anything like that. This is a pretty straightforward process. I haven't seen anyone else making steam with the flame generator. It's actually something that I kind of came up with while I was working on a project for a client. I was shooting some boxes and I had a cup of coffee that I added as a prop in the background. And again, by the time I got to actually shooting it, I needed to create steam. So that's what that was all about. So hopefully this helps you, and take it easy, guys.